everybody. Thanks so much for joining us right here on The Right View. Tonight, we are joined by senior anchor and president of programming at Real America's Voice News. You know her, Dr. Gina Loudon, and Turning Point USA spokesperson and Gen Z conservative activist Isabel Brown. Ladies, we're so excited to have you on. It's ladies' night here on The Right View, back in action. And we're going to start with another lady who made quite a splash recently, Maxine Waters. Of course, you can never stay away from her for too long. She recently made some comments in Minnesota. I think we've all heard about these. She started out by encouraging protesters to break the law by violating the curfew that is currently in place, and then took it to another level by telling protesters, we've got to get more confrontational. Now, we've seen how dangerous and really devastating to small businesses these riots and protests have been almost over the past entire year. So to see Maxine Waters appear to incite violence, the very thing that, by the way, she accused Donald Trump of doing to try and impeach him, seems incredibly hypocritical. She even claimed that President Trump was, quote, trying to create a civil war. But that isn't the end of her hypocrisy. Of course, there's more when it comes to her. Prior to her trip to Minnesota, she had no problem requesting personal police protection for herself. So, Dr. Gina, I mean, should we expect anything to come from this? Do you think that there will be any repercussions for Congresswoman Maxine Waters?
Well, it's interesting, Laura. You know, I interviewed Lauren Boebert, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, on my show yesterday, and she told me that she has actually filed something so that it would cause Maxine Waters to be forced to respond to this bill that would definitely take sanctions against her from Congress. So we'll hope that Lauren Boebert, Congresswoman Boebert, can get some momentum in that action. And I'll make sure that I tweet that out so that all of your viewers here can help support her in that action, because Maxine Waters should be held accountable. She can act like this is just a slip of the tongue or something. You know, her comment that people should get more confrontational, Laura. But if you look at Maxine Waters, some of the things she said, if you see Trump supporters in a restaurant, you should create a crowd. Tell them they're not welcome. She said we need the people to harass Trump supporters. She called Trump supporters scumbags. She said she will go and take Trump out tonight. These are just a couple of the little samplings of the things that Mad Max has said in the past. So she has a long record of inciting violence against people that she doesn't agree with.
Yeah, and there's a clear double standard, Isabel. I think that's really the issue here, is that there's one way that conservatives seem to be treated, especially by the media, and then one way that Democrats seem to be treated. If a Republican had flown to a hotbed like Minneapolis in the midst of, you know, this trial that everybody has been on pins and needles in that state, but especially in that city about over the past several months, we knew that there was a verdict coming soon. Everybody was anticipating it. She is not from that district. She is from California. If a Republican from out of state had flown in specifically to be part of the chaos and then encouraged people to create violence and you know, get out in the streets and break curfew and do all of these things, what do you think would have happened to a Republican had they done this?
Well, first things first, there would have been countless media headlines about every individual aspect of this story. Let's not forget Representative Waters is from California, where people are largely still burdened by lockdowns, by shutdowns from the government. They can't necessarily go to work or reopen their small business, but have no fear. Your congressional representatives can travel to the city of Minneapolis and try to incite violence. You have an individual who is literally a lawmaker encouraging individuals to break the law verbatim, to cause more confrontation, to fight for the things that you believe in, to fight for social justice. I'm old enough at 23 years old to remember in January when fight was the new F word in politics. As soon as a conservative even dared to say they were fighting for the things they believe in from a metaphorical perspective, you were inciting violence and causing insurrection of our federal government here in the United States, should be impeached from the presidency, should be prosecuted for crimes against the federal government. And you, according to the mainstream media, were a domestic terrorist. Yet this individual in our United States Congress has been getting away with this type of hyperbolic and inflammatory language, using words like fight, like harass, as you just said, Dr. Gina. What a specific word to be using in these situations against political adversaries. And yet there's zero repercussions at all. There haven't been throughout her entire career in Washington, D.C. Not to freak everyone out, I was born in 1997, and Maxine Waters has been in the United States Congress as a representative for California since 1991. This is repeated behavior that's never had any consequences whatsoever, and I don't expect that to start anytime soon.
Well, now that we all feel really old here, I remember 1997 very vividly. I won't tell you what grade I was in school, and Dr. Gina, we won't ask you either. But you're spot on, Isabel. I think we don't expect to see anything happen to Maxine Waters. I know there was a vote the other day in the House, and of course now the Democrats outweigh the Republicans in the House, and they voted against really doing anything to her. And I mean, what a bunch of hypocrites. What hypocritical behavior to impeach Donald Trump after he was out of office, mind you. It is all so crazy. But I feel like the American people every single day are seeing the true colors of the Democrats. And here is another reason, because we told you it was going to happen. And sure enough, new legislation is being introduced by radical Democrats to expand the Supreme Court to 13. President Trump warned us on the campaign trail. We all talked about this, that the Democrats would attempt to pack the Supreme Court, and this is their first attempt. Isabel, give me your thoughts on the Democrats' attempt to completely rewrite the rules, because they don't like them and they don't find them helpful anymore. So let me do something that'll help us out. Let's pack the Supreme Court.
I wish I could say I was surprised that this was the next step in the Biden administration's agenda to fundamentally change our government and the way our country operates on a day-to-day basis. But let's not forget, there were several questions on the campaign trail that either Joe Biden lied about or he refused to answer because he didn't want to incriminate himself later as president of the United States for having done that thing that he lied about on the campaign trail. Banning fracking, expanding abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy, even partial birth abortion, and having that funded by our federal government. And now, of course, expanding the Supreme Court, a question he all out refused to answer for several months in presidential debates and in questions from the press on the campaign trail. The deal with the Supreme Court is not that this is so much of a political issue, but rather that we're injecting politics into a space that should not have partisanship whatsoever. The Supreme Court was meant to live outside of the realm of Democrats versus Republicans. And yet when you read headlines about this decision to expand the Supreme Court today, you're hearing that President Biden's going to offset a conservative majority set forth by President Trump. That's how it works. When there's a vacancy, a president fills the seat. It's how it's always worked for hundreds of years in this country. And nothing has changed to indicate that there should be a major overhaul of what that system looks like now. To suggest that all of a sudden this should be a partisan process really does show the true colors, to echo what you were saying, Lara, of the Democrat Party. And frankly, I think that's somewhat of a blessing for the American people. For far too long, we have heard the lies of the Democrat Party on the campaign trail about how they were going to make all of our lives better. And yet over and over and over again, this being the latest tick on that tick mark of different things they're trying to do to change our culture, we're only going to see our lives get worse.
Well, Dr. Gina, strangely, it actually appears that Democrats are facing some opposition from within their own ranks. Harry Reid warned Biden against court packing, saying we better be very, very careful. And NBC News ran a story saying Supreme Court packing via a Democratic bill will politicize the system even more, to Isabel's point. The Hill just had an op-ed saying court packing legislation is straight out of Maduro's playbook. So how dangerous is this idea? Do you agree that this goes against what our democracy stands for and truly everything American?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg said it was a bad idea.
Right.
Joe Biden himself called it boneheaded. We've been doing it this way since 1869, Lara. There's a reason why it is working the way it's working. Any government that has ever functioned with a constitutional governance like we do, if they've tried to change the way their highest court works, they've fallen to demise. As you mentioned, like Maduro, like Venezuela, and we saw this whole revolution take place. And I don't know if you'd call it a revolution, a devolution, where Venezuela devolved under Maduro as their court was packed, as their highest court was packed from a very constitutional governance, very much like the one we have here. And it devolved as soon as they packed the court. There were, I believe, some 400 decisions that came out right after that put them right into the most horribly abrasive socialism, took all the power away from the people, and now it's not reattainable. And so that's what happens when you take the power away from the people and hand it over to a tyrannical government where you cannot give it back. And that is really what we are looking at, handing the power that the people have now. It won't be Republican versus Democrat, Laura. Those days will be gone. It will be we the people versus they the power. And those will be the two parties that remain in America. And it doesn't matter what name you give it, that will be the reality. But the reason, I think it's always important to look at motives. You know, a lot of us who supported Donald Trump, we did it because we looked at his motive. Why in the world would a man like this want to give up everything he had to run for president? And that's when we jumped on board. I want people to look at motive here. Why would the Democrats want to do this? It's very important to consider this. It's not to unpack the courts as they're trying to, change the vernacular here and make everything twist the words around as the Democrats like to do. It's because they can't get the American people to vote for them. So they tried importing illegals to do that. They can't get the American people to agree to change everything out about the Electoral College. They can't get the American people to agree that changing out the Electoral College or abolishing the Electoral College is a good idea. So the last thing they can do is fraudulently win elections, as they have gone around the country and tried to do, not just on the national level, but also on the state and local level. If they have the Supreme Court, then they can control the entire judiciary, and forever they can win everything at the top level. It's completely politicized, and they never again have to answer to the voters ever again. This is a really important thing to understand. That is the motive, because they can't win with their ideas in the face of the American people. So they must control all the branches of government, and the highest branch of government is the judiciary. The last branch of government is the judiciary, and that's what they want to control. That's what's so scary about this.
Incredibly frightening. And I want to go back for a second to something you were just talking about, which is once we give up our rights, they are not just given back to us. You're talking about Venezuela and what happened there. And by the way, happened incredibly quickly in Venezuela. So people who think that the idea of us going down that path is 100 years away, it is not. It is on our doorstep right now. And let me ask a question to Americans out there. Why are we still wearing masks everywhere? If people are getting vaccinated, and our president of the United States, Joe Biden, has been vaccinated, yet he stands up in front of America with a mask on, what are we doing? We have given up our rights under the guise of COVID over the past year. They haven't come back, Gina and Isabel, and I am afraid that people are going to see that this is going to continue to happen. We have to stand up and we have to speak very loudly and fight for our rights as American citizens. What has happened in this country over the past year is incredibly frightening. The way the media is pushing forward these socialist ideas and championing them, and the way big tech and social media outlets have censored conservatives. Make no mistake about it, they are trying to take more rights away from us every single day. And once they take them away, they do not come back. They don't just hand them back over to us. Maybe that's why we are still wearing masks. Maybe that's why things have not opened up in most states across the country. Now, I know some of them, like the great state of Florida, Gina, where I know you are, they've got it right down there, and they are opening back up. But we need to be very, very conscious of all of this happening across America. And it brings me to our next topic, which we seem to talk about pretty much every week on this show, critical race theory. Again, if you're unfamiliar, critical race theory is a new push in our schools for teachers to talk to our children about how America was racist, how America continues to be racist, and how we need to fix all the racism that we're all guilty of. This is just an inherently racist country. Instead of, teaching the future of our country with, I don't know, math, science, art, history, all of the things that would matter to children going forward. Last week, a New York City teacher even spoke out saying that we are damaging kids with critical race theory. And he even talked about how he's being told to embrace anti-racism training, going on to say anti-racist training sounds righteous, but is actually the opposite of truth in advertising. It requires teachers like himself to treat students differently based on race. Then this was only amplified by a father whose daughter was in a completely different New York City school. This man wrote a letter to fellow families with children in this school expressing his concerns and saying that he was going to remove his daughter from Brearley School. Now, this is an elite Manhattan all-girls prep school, costs a whopping $54,000 a year. Maybe that's why celebrities have their kids in there, like Chelsea Clinton and Tina Fey both have their children in there. This father had enough of this indoctrination, and I think a lot of us have gotten to that point. In his letter, he said, by viewing every element of education, every aspect of history, and every facet of society through the lens of skin color and race, we are desecrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He really said that these policies encourage kids to judge and be judged by the color of their skin. Now, ladies, correct me if I'm wrong, that is a racist idea to judge people solely based on the color of their skin. He even called out the school's vacuous, inappropriate, and fanatical use of words, and we hear these all the time, such as equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. And he said if Brearley's administration was truly concerned about so-called equity, it would be discussing the cessation of admissions preferences for legacies, siblings, and those families with especially deep pockets. I highly encourage our viewers to take a look at the full article because the full letter this man wrote was so well written and it is so spot on. And I think it's what so many of us have been feeling lately about the way that race is just jammed down our throats all the time. I have a 1 and 3-year-old. My 3-year-old is in school. I think about what is he learning? What is he being exposed to? Isabel, I want to come to you. You're a Gen Zer. Have you experienced any of this happening in the classrooms? What has been your experience with critical race theory?
I've had an up close and personal experience with what all of this indoctrination looks like throughout my college years at Colorado State University, where I never intended to be talking about politics in the classroom. My dream was to become a surgeon. So I was studying biomedical sciences, but even in my classes like anatomy and physiology and organic chemistry, we were talking about exactly this, not just critical race theory, but leftist indoctrination across the board. There are infinity genders. Abortion doesn't end a unique human life. We should get rid of the First Amendment because hate speech is so much of a problem in our country. Don't ask me why I was paying tuition in physics class to talk about hate speech, but that's the reality on college campuses today. In fact, I literally wrote the book on it. My first book came out a couple of weeks ago called Frontlines. And this is the reality for college students at virtually every college campus in America, not just in political science or ethnic studies or gender studies, where you may expect this type of indoctrination, but across the board in every field of academia whatsoever. Unfortunately, our inability to do something about this on college campuses throughout the last several decades, and the last few years in particular, has now trickled down to every level of education in America, not just in public schools, but in private schools as well. And you're seeing kindergartners being read anti-racist baby or feminist baby picture books that are actively being taught in kindergarten and preschool. You're seeing entire public school districts embrace the New York Times' 1619 Project, the most prominent critical race theory curriculum out there that literally says the founding values of America were not freedom and liberty, but were white supremacy, slavery and racism being taught to every public school student, for example, in Chicago, who's a public school district that has adopted this curriculum. This is reality. And if you're listening to this and you have children who are school aged in America, your children are being taught this in some way, shape, or form, unless they are homeschooled or attending an overtly conservative charter school in America today. I find this interesting that this was all happening in New York City this week, and this letter is phenomenally written. Every American should read it. But I was in New York City for my book tour just a few weeks ago and had the opportunity to see the Statue of Liberty for the first time. It was a beautiful, moving experience. But I read a quote on the wall from Martin Luther King Jr., amazingly, that said, "Freedom is never granted by the oppressor. It has to be demanded from the oppressed." And when you hear that word oppressed, if you're listening, I don't want you to think of the scream at the sky, blue-haired millennial crybaby who just couldn't handle it that Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016. Every American has been oppressed in some way, shape, or form in the last year or so as big government and socialism and critical race theory continue to infiltrate every level of our culture. It's time for every parent to be exactly like this parent in New York City, to write a letter to their school district, maybe move their child to a different school that offers a better educational outcome. But this idea that we need to be viewing all Americans by the color of their skin primarily before judging any content of their character is overtly racist. And that's only going to set us up for more division in the future.
You know, I saw a post by Benny Johnson. He's been on this show a couple of times. He posted a picture with his daughter, who's a baby under a year old, and his daughter was there. He happens to be white, and his daughter was there with a child, I don't know, maybe a little bit older, who happened to be black. And his commentary was exactly what I have witnessed from both of my kids. Children don't ever judge anyone based on the color of their skin, Dr. Gina. Children are inherently unbiased. They just want to love one another. They want to play together. They don't care how you look. They don't care about any of that. It is a taught thing, racism. And by amplifying it and having it just laden in every aspect of our kids' lives, it's incredibly worrisome to me what we are doing to future generations in America. I don't think anyone is born with any racist ideas, yet they feel they have to just put race at the forefront of everything. I know you have children in school as well. How have you felt about this? What are your thoughts?
Well, yes, I do. You know, I can speak to this as a mother, but I think perhaps more informatively, I can speak to this for my more than a decade in my 2 master's degrees and PhDs in human behavior, where, Laura, I studied this over and over again. And when you look at human behavior at every stage of the lifespan, if you don't focus on these differences, natural human behavior tends to gravitate towards similarities. That's why the left likes to use tribalism so much, is because they know this fact that psychologically we tend to gravitate towards similarities. That's why tribalism works. That's why gangs work. That's why people seek out those that they find similarities with. So if you continue to divide people, you have to continue to focus on differences. That's why they continue to focus on critical race theory. And they focus on critical race theory to distract from the policies that actually work, like rebuilding the family, like taking away dependence, such as the welfare system that the left loves to use to divide and fracture minority families and make them dependent. The things that Donald Trump, for example, instituted that reduced murders in minority areas. All of the things that Donald Trump did in his policies throughout his presidency reduced crime, reduced murders. And that's why so many minority families flocked to the Donald Trump presidency. It was his policies. And now you look at the Biden administration. We have crime up dramatically. We have murders up dramatically. And it's ever since they began talking about bringing back all of the racial division, increasing talk about welfare, and it's all based on this critical race theory. They have to keep driving that principle home, Laura, to continue to divide people, to continue to get votes, to continue to amass power and money. And they know if they don't, America will naturally unify based on our shared principles. Donald Trump knows that too. And that's why he had the philosophy, make America great again. That's something everyone can unite around. The Democrats know they must continue to divide. And critical race theory, that word critical, is critical to the division of this country and to the continuity of the Socialist Democrat Party.
Yeah, and I find people really disgusting who have flown in, especially to places like Minneapolis, these so-called civil rights activists. No, you're not. You are just fanning the flames of an already really tense and a scary situation for a lot of people who live in these cities. You're there to cause more chaos and more division. And Gina, I think you're right. We are more alike than we are different in America. We all, want the American dream. We all want to take care of our families. We all share so many similarities, but the differences we do have should be celebrated. Could you imagine how boring it would be if we were all exactly the same? Could you imagine how terrible a place that would be to live? We celebrate one another's differences, but we are all incredibly similar. It was Donald Trump who said we all bleed the same red blood. And I think of that all the time because it is so true. At our core, we are all very, very similar, but we celebrate the differences that make us all unique individuals, that we all have different talents. We all have different hobbies, interests, those things. We should all celebrate those things. And we have to keep that in mind because you're going to continue to hear this message, I think, from the left. You're going to continue to see them try to divide us based on race. We cannot allow that to happen. We are so much stronger together as a country. And I really feel deep down in my soul that we're going to get to a place where people realize what has been happening, that they've been played by the media and by the Democrats for so long. And they're going to be very, very upset when they realize that they were sold a false bill of goods by the Democrats. The media continued to push toward a narrative that was false, knowing it was false in order to gain power and influence, etc. I hope it happens sooner rather than later, but we all have to stay on top of this and pay very, very close attention. We cannot let this slip through the cracks. It is too important to the future of our country. Now, last but certainly not least, the Associated Press reported on a bombshell study that found that a survey of Americans believe that the number one value that the media needs to have is, wait for it, providing people with the facts. Imagine that, ladies. Isn't that interesting? What if that happened? I know. A whopping 67% of Americans found this to be the most important value of the five about which they were asked. And do you know which one came in with the lowest, 29%? Spotlighting what's not right. You would think that would be higher, but guess when the media has made it their job to inject opinion into the news and scare people into caring about things that they themselves deem important, dangerous, or wrong, it would appear the American people are starting to wake up and realize maybe the people responsible for reporting the facts might instead have different priorities. Gina, let me get your thoughts on this. I mean, we've known that the people don't trust the media very much anymore. Their approval rating is incredibly low right now. What do you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, Lara, this is something I think those of us who are trying so hard to fill that void, like you doing this show, like me with Real America's Voice, trying to separate opinion, because I think people do like to hear people's opinions tossed out there as long as they know that's what they're getting. It's very different when you hire, for example, a George Stephanopoulos and you present him as an unbiased news anchor and you say that he has no opinions, for example, when obviously he does. Those kinds of biases when entered into the arena as strict news just aren't going to be taken seriously by the general public. And the general public is smarter than that. And if you don't give them credit for that, then they feel like, like they've been lied to. And then their level of cynicism goes up. And so that's why folks like all of us have been for a long, long time trying to, provide something that says this is news and this is opinion. And I think that this doesn't surprise me at all. I'm surprised we needed a poll to tell us this, frankly. But I think those of us who've been trying to provide alternative media sources for a long, long time have recognized that it is important just to be honest and transparent with audiences, and that they will appreciate that and they will flock to those who are sincere about it. And I think that also, I know I keep bringing up your father-in-law, but I think that also is what America fell in love with about Donald Trump, was his authenticity. He may not have always said it the way people would have said it themselves. You know, there's a Southern genteelness that may not have said it the way a New Yorker would have said it, but he said it. So even that Southerner who appreciates honesty was going to appreciate that authenticity. America fell in love with authenticity when they fell in love with Donald Trump, and they are craving it worse than anything. You post one picture of Donald Trump on your social media and everybody says, oh, they miss him, and you can feel it in their words. Their heart just explodes because they miss that authenticity, when now they've got a puppet on a string being controlled by God knows who, and it's terrifying. They miss that, they crave that, and we didn't need a poll to tell us that we like honesty in journalism.
Well, and Isabel, by the way, I feel like one of the things that Donald Trump actually, you know, whether people want to admit it or not, one of the things that we can credit him with doing is actually exposing the media and exposing so much of you know, the opinion, as Dr. Gina is just saying, that gets infused into every aspect of their reporting, when instead we really just want them to report the facts. It was Donald Trump who really finally called them out and I think exposed them for what they are. But do you think, can they clean their act up? Are they going to be able to redeem themselves?
I doubt it, truthfully, from a mainstream media perspective, but there's good news, and that's that citizen journalism and independent media is on the rise in America.
Great
Programs like this one, social media shows, things that you may even see on TikTok or Snapchat are starting to replace the frequency with which Americans get information from mainstream media like cable news or magazines or newspapers. So that's a definitely hallmark, I think, of what happened after the Trump administration, of people wanting to fill that void in the market for themselves, to look around at their fellow countrymen and say, we deserve the truth. And if the mainstream media is not going to provide it to us, we'll have to provide it for ourselves. How inspiring to be a part of that movement and to know that people are hungry. They're excited about getting the truth every day. It is very sad, and our state of affairs right now is incredibly tragic when the mainstream media and those sources that we refer to as the news are not simply reporting on the biggest headlines of the day, but what they want you to think, what they want you to know. James O'Keefe of Project Veritas recently uncovered a lot of secrets from CNN, our friends on cable television, about this precise reality, that they're not reporting the biggest stories. Maybe they're reporting stories that have zero evidence associated with them whatsoever, but they know they drive ratings and they drive people's fear. They specifically mention capitalizing on fear over and over and over again from these tapes from Project Veritas. And just how little must they think of the American people when they are constantly giving you content that's meant to scare you, to subdue you, to want you glued to the television all day long, not even willing to blink in between segments. We deserve so much better than that. And to Dr. Gina's point, we're not giving the people enough credit. The American people are a lot smarter than politicians think. And unfortunately, I think those in power right now think that we're too stupid to start raising eyebrows, to start asking questions, to say, hang on a second, that doesn't sound right to me. I think there's an awakening right now as a result of the Trump presidency within the American people, and I'm so excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, and you know what the good news is? We all have these devices at our fingertips at all times, and I can't tell you the number of times I feel like it's been really beneficial that someone has captured, you know, whatever it was happening. So if you see something, record it, make sure that you capture it, because you know what, we cannot trust the news, Isabel, as you say, to give us information anymore. We have to do it ourselves. And that's why, you know, we have a show like this. That's why, Dr. Gina, what you're doing is so important as well. We want to continue to get information to people. And you're not crazy for thinking the things that you think. There are millions and millions of Americans who agree with you out there. I always want to make sure people understand that. But Isabel, Dr. Gina, great to have you guys on tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
For our ladies' night tonight on The Right View, and to all you viewers at home, as always, thank you for joining us. We'll see you back here next time with more of The Right View.